Hello everyone, and welcome to our third and final video installment from Grantmakers in the Arts 2013. Thanks for bearing with us on this bold new experiment, and we will be following it up with some more traditional blog-like written posts as soon as we have each gotten a chance to get some sleep.
I kind of feel like that there is a theme of curation a little bit, because there was the panel that we had in the morning, and then which was reflected a little bit in Ethan Zuckerman's talk at the plenary. And what was it exactly that I was thinking about with respect to this? Oh yeah, it was the fact that he was talking about xenophilia and the idea that we sort of need people in society who that these folks who are good at bridging divides between people who are not like themselves are going to be increasingly important in society, because the internet in some ways is making it while it is facilitating connections, it is also in some ways making it easier for us to find like-minded folks, and basically folks who are not friends with us but would be if they were, if they're around us and
believe the same things we do. Homophily, he calls
exactly,
it.
right. And so to the extent that this idea of diversity of background and thought and experience and perspective and all of that is important, then you're going to need these bridge builders. And for me, it was sort of it is reflective a little bit of the themes that were present in this panel that Daniel and I were part of this morning, called Rethinking the Grant Panel, because there really is a need for, if we believe in this idea of kind of cultural exchange and a diversity of voices and so forth, then those voices are going to have to come from a lot of different backgrounds, and the ability to the privilege of being able to express oneself in public is something that this body here, this group that we've been hanging out with this week, has the unique ability to make happen in a way that almost that few other entities in the world do, because they have both the means and the mandate to make that happen. So as I see it, there is sort of, and I didn't really say this so much in the session, but there is sort of a bit of a moral imperative, I think, to take that opportunity, and maybe not for every single grant maker, but for the group as a whole, to put in the effort to try and give opportunities for expression to people who wouldn't otherwise have it, instead of sort of giving a helping hand to the folks who arguably would be fine without it.
Going back to your session on Rethinking the Grant Panel, when you mentioned curation, did the conversation really did it center just around making sure that grant panelists are cognizant of choosing artists who might be underrepresented, or did it also get into the composition of the grant panel itself and how that might influence?
Well, it was more about, I think Ian spoke first and set up the context of the panel as this capacity problem that he's written about, and I've written about with him in a couple of places, which is to say that everybody's making art these days. You can sit in your hotel room after a conference and make a video and upload it to YouTube, and suddenly you've got a piece of art.
You can.
I
never called this art.
Next year.
That's right. This is performance art. And so it's getting easier and easier to make art in many genres, and so you have proliferation of artists, you have thus potential proliferation of applications.
Right.
And so the question is, how do 5 people sitting in a room talking about applications cope with the millions and millions of artists, the millions of hours of video that are out there, the millions of paintings, whatever it may be? That was sort of the question. It was more, I think, a technical, logistical question, although the ways that you address it then raise all these questions of equity and, who is competent to judge a jazz pianist? Is it only jazz pianists? Is it only musicians? There were some really interesting pressures put on the innovative methods that Ian and Ed Harsh, who's the CEO of New Music USA, talked about. And I wish we'd gotten into more of them, because I think they were really fascinating.
Yeah. In general, the thing that struck me the most, so at one point I asked the people who were in attendance, and it was a very well-attended session, how many of them had either revamped their grant guideline, or sorry, not the grant guidelines, their the way that their panels work, or were thinking about it in the last 3 years. And I'd say probably about 3/4 of the people raised their hands. I mean, it was amazing. Obviously, it was a biased sample because you probably wouldn't come to the rethinking the grant panel session if you weren't rethinking your own grant panel. But but that being said, I mean, like I said, there were a lot of people there. So there's clearly a sort of an undercurrent of interest in this topic, and there also seemed to be an indication that this idea of there being kind of more applications or possibilities to deal with than are comfortable seem to resonate as well. But this is now my 5th conference at Grantmakers in the Arts, and I can't remember another set like us ever talking about this in this kind of formal way. It's been really surprising to me, and the people were asking questions like up until the end. We ran. There wasn't nearly enough time to address everybody's questions, and not just questions, but the kind of they had their own experiences of their own experiments that they were trying in their own programs. People were sharing details about that as well. So it seems like there's a potential for more conversation around these kinds of nuts and bolts types of issues, like how is it that we actually do our practice, as grant makers. I say "are" even though I'm not a grant maker, but like I kind of feel like, and it's the same. It kind of goes back to the same thing we were talking about yesterday with evaluation too. Like I think there's a hunger for talk about practice, to complement these more philosophical discussions that tend to dominate the GIA, and these kinds of conferences in general, I think.
Yeah, well, one of the themes that I heard loud and clear today that came up in Ethan Zuckerman's talk, as well as things that I heard yesterday, just how rapidly the world around us is changing, yet the way we conduct our day-to-day work isn't keeping pace with it at all. And I personally am leaving this conference feeling challenged in my own thinking about education, K-12 education, arts education, systemic change, and what systemic change looks like in this environment in which the system might very well rapidly be becoming obsolete and isn't necessarily the only option anymore.
And by the system, you mean like the system of public education, or?
Yeah. So digital technologies and as related to student learning came up again and again and again. Yesterday I went to a session called Engage, Create, and Share that talked about the Hive networks, which was really interesting. And this afternoon I went offsite to Drexel University, and it seems like they have a really are on the forefront of thinking about how to create cross-disciplinary programs so that their students are graduating with hybrid competencies in the arts and in the sciences. And right as we were leaving, one of the presenters from Drexel made a comment about how a lot of their students aren't sticking around for the full 4 years because they actually get jobs before they're done, and they don't see the value in getting a degree.
Wow.
And that's pretty significant. And he mentioned that his belief that there are going to be all these alternative pathways that spring up very quickly around higher education, and of course they will trickle down to K-12. So we're all sitting around trying to figure out how to push forward policies that ensure that every student within this K-12 system gets X, Y, and Z. And I can't help but wonder, but if by the time we figure out how to do that, we'll look up and
right.
what we've accomplished is completely it's a century old.
I do think that this sort of this idea of expanding the frame, and in particular, kind of getting outside of the arts box, is potentially a little radical. Like it's obviously there was some content at the conference this year that was that tried to do that. Like I went to a session on yesterday on human-centered design, for example, that isn't where it was all about sort of social impact design and sort of trying to kind of bring those parallel lessons to the arts. And so there were some other things like that. But I think that the I didn't hear a ton of like sort of blow it up and start all over again talk. And And I wonder, I'm a little hungry for it. Like,
let's blow it up and start all over again.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we don't like to admit how scared we are of some of the things that we promote, right? So collaboration, we talk about it a lot. All day today I was hearing about breaking down silos and, cross-disciplinary work. But in reality, when push comes to shove, we want to make sure that the arts are named specifically in a line item and called out very, in a way that we understand.
Right.
And we're not really, we're not willing to give that up. In the at Drexel this afternoon, someone made the very good point that when you have really authentic collaborations between the artistic disciplines and scientific disciplines, they start to transform each other. And so our own understandings of what we mean by art should shift at the same time.
And kind of where I was going with it mentally was, so you mentioned the 5 disciplines, right? And it reminded me that when we talk about the arts, it's often from a very discipline-oriented framework, right? It's like the arts are music, the arts are visual arts and painting and sculpture, the arts are film and media. Not the arts are being creative in whatever context, right? Like, starting a food truck and, or a community garden or something like that, and, or being, coming up with the exercise of creativity in daily life. There is some movement out there to sort of bring in the creative community, the broader creative community, creative industries and so forth as allies. And I think that's proceeding apace. That the keynote today was an example of that in some ways, but it's not really reflected in practice. We don't give grants to food trucks, right? Maybe we should.
Maybe we should.
Maybe we should. Like, how is that not part of culture, right? Like, so on that rather radical note, we are going to wrap up our coverage of Grantmakers in the Arts Conference 2013. As Talia said, look for some final reflections for us in the near future. We've really enjoyed this opportunity to test our limits a little bit in more ways than one.
Try to learn iMovie.
I'm so much closer to you guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
In terms of measured in inches. So anyway, but it's been a lot of fun, and we hope you've enjoyed it too. And we'll see you in text form.
Let's go hit the food truck.
Blooper reel. It's gonna be a long night. All right.